Okay, so officially welcome everyone to our workshop today, Artificial Intelligence Teaching and Information Literacy Concerns and Opportunities. We are so excited to have you here today for our workshop. So I know that some folks know me. If you don't know me, my name is Jane Hammonds. I'm an assistant professor and the Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian in the University Libraries at Ohio State. And you can email me at hammonds.73@osu.edu. And I'm super excited to be joined today by my colleague, Michael. So Michael, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Michael Floral, Associate Professor, University Libraries here at OSU, and resident obsessive compulsive person, obsessive about AI person. I've worked on some grants. I have a tiny bit of technical background, but someone who's just kind of read up and learned up a lot on the subject.
Thank you. And yeah, definitely would not be able to give this workshop without Michael. So grateful for him taking the time out of his day to join us because he is definitely our expert, AI expert in the libraries for sure. So we did want to mention, some folks may be aware of this. We did an AI teaching with AI. Michael and I did a teaching with AI workshop last August. And this workshop does build on that. It's not necessary at all that you attended that workshop, but this workshop does build on that. It has some crossover in content and then some new content as well. If you did want to take a look at that previous workshop, you can access the slides or the recording if you're interested in seeing those. So I just wanted to make sure that folks knew that those were available. Some really great content on those that we were not able to include in this one. So I just wanted to make that available to you if you were interested. And if someone, there's someone out there who has their microphone on, if you could make sure that you are muted so we're not hearing that background noise. That would
Jane.
Wonderful. So what we're going to be doing today, we're going to talk a little bit about some concerns related to AI. I'm going to give you a chance to investigate an AI tool. Michael's going to give a demo using tools, so you can ask some questions about that. And then we'll try to take what we learned during that first part of the workshop and think about it in the context of teaching information literacy more specifically. So that's what we're going to do today. Participation is encouraged. You can share your comments in the chat. It's not required, so if you would rather just sit and listen, that is totally fine as well. But definitely feel free to share comments, questions that you have in the chat, and we'll definitely try to get through those and have some time for questions as we go through as well. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Michael.
Yeah, if y'all could just answer this question in the chat. We want this to be interactive, but really this kind of helps me set the tone of understanding what kind of 20-minute presentation about AI you want. Yeah, let's see, I'll give you all a minute. I'm seeing a pretty good mixture of amazed, excited, curious, polarized, and anxious. Excited, curious. Yeah. So, okay, this kind of tracks. There's going to be a broad range. We all have a lot of feelings about this. Yeah, scary. Yeah, I get that. Hopefully, I'm going to try to rip off the Band-Aid just a touch, really kind of give some technical background information, which is important, I think, to understand where current generative foundational dual use models are. That's a lot of words. I get it. But I'm going to try to give very brief background, and then we're going to play around with it and kind of explore it together. So there's a lot of terms here. Really, artificial intelligence is actually quite a large field. When we're talking about generative AI, we're in this, the innermost circle, it's a subcircle within deep learning. And we were talking about that, these current large language models. You're talking about a type of neural network, which is roughly based off of our own brains. We have different neurons that work at different levels of abstraction. So you have neurons in your brain that focus on curved figures versus straight ones. That kind of help you identify a 1 versus a 2. we've built computers basically that are kind of based off of this increasing levels of abstraction. And now it's gotten to the point where we kind of have the horsepower and we have the technical expertise to ingest a lot of data, a lot of data, basically the whole internet, 40, maybe even 50 terabytes worth of text data, give or take. We can apply statistical methods to that so that you can do something. We get generative AI. So if you want to, like a really basic examples, artificial intelligence really broadly, like old school computer games are a form of artificial intelligence. If you do something, in Pac-Man, the ghosts respond in different ways. That's artificial intelligence. Machine learning, you can think of it as regression analysis, how one variable interacts with another. We're kind of getting at that through statistics and probabilities. And then deep learning is a different type of computer architecture, the neural network. Okay, so the first question a lot of people have is, like, can we detect cheating? Basically, no, you can't trust AI detection software. It's unreliable, don't use it, don't trust it, it's terrible now. There has to be other ways to get around this problem, but basically, you cannot trust AI detection software. And then real quick, OSU just has some specific guidance on this, basically saying that it's at the instructor's discretion about AI use, and you need to be transparent in what you do and do not expect how you want students to interact with AI and the assignments. So at best, it's important to know, we talk about hallucinations. At best, the best current generative AI model we have is ChatGPT-4, and in their own benchmarking tests, at best on certain subjects, it's about 80% accurate. Coding, it might be 75%, give or take a couple of percentage points. So that's really important to keep in mind. And the reason why it's only so accurate, this is kind of weird. Your calculator on your phone, you would rely on for a very important calculation. You can't ultimately rely on this multi-billion-dollar technology, is because it's fundamentally just applying statistical analysis to guess the next word in a row. Now, you can argue there's some type of emergent properties that comes out as a result of being able to predict hundreds or thousands of words in a row accurately, and it could pass, the Uniform Bar exam, the United States medical licensing exam, but it could also make fundamental errors, and that's because it's probabilistic in nature. It's just trying to it assigns a probability for each word that goes next. It's also important to note that this is gaining increased functionality consistently. So now you can say, here's a CSV file or an Excel file, generate visuals. This is one example I worked up really quickly. It's kind of crappy now, to be honest, but my bet is in the near future, there's a lot of money being poured in to make this type of functionality work. Even Microsoft Copilot, there's demonstrations of you taking data from an Excel file, making a visualization, crafting an email to your team, making a PowerPoint slide, all seamlessly, all through different apps. So this is coming down the pipe, and it's something you need to be aware of, I think. You also hear about models becoming multimodal. So what that means is it could take in text, image, audio files, and then output text, image, audio, video files. So at this link, you'll see someone input an audio and an image, and then the output is a video of this teddy bear sitting on a board riding across the street. It's a 1-second video. It's not particularly good, but again, in the near future, I think you can expect it's not just going to be input text, output text. You might input text and output a minute-long video where the animation is actually pretty decent. So I mentioned the hallucination problem. That's a problem for now, but there are companies that are trying to address that. Perplexity.ai is a generative AI. It's not particularly good. It's not close to ChatGPT-4, but at the end of each sentence or each claim, it references what it is saying. So this is an attempt to address the hallucination problem. You see where it's getting this information from, and you can click on it and investigate it yourself. And then lastly, just to muddy the waters more, ChatGPT 4.0, if you pay the $20 a month to be at that level. You can create your own, what they call GPTs, but basically you kind of prompt tune, I think is the technical term. They give you an opportunity to create your own custom AI. And now there's a marketplace for those custom AIs, kind of like an app store. And there's entire sections devoted to education. The most used apps get rise to the top. And so you can see general tutors, coding tutors, math solvers, etc. Kathleen is asking, what does the hallucination problem really mean? Great question. So what it means is it might output, you ask it for a question, help me learn about national parks, the history of US national parks from the 1900s to 2000. And it might output 500-word answer detailing the history. But there might be some claims that states that Woodrow Wilson was an integral part of this, where that are just factually wrong. And that's because it's not looking up the answer. It doesn't have a conception of the world or of history. It's just, it thinks that Woodrow Wilson fits, tends to be associated with the national parks, but he just loved parks, and there's a lot of stuff on Wikipedia on the training data. So it's not actually looking up the information and making sure that it's accurate. It is just predicting the next word in a row. It actually doesn't even have a conception of words. It uses what's called tokens. So it really just kind of splices together 3 or 4 characters in a row at a time. Great question. I can get more into that later. So at the end of the day, current generative AI technologies, because of this hallucination problem, because of its probabilistic nature, they're currently neither reliable nor trustworthy. I wouldn't rely on them for something important without an expert vetting the information. It doesn't mean they can't give some impressive results or do some impressive things, and that functionality continues to grow. But currently, given the fundamental nature of it, they're not reliable, they're not trustworthy. Part of the problem with that is because they're black boxes. The computational hardware, the computation is so complex, the neural networks are so complex, the deep models, right? So you hear about 70 billion parameters. Those are 70 billion little knobs that can turn on and off given a variety of factors. Basically, we can't comprehend it. And even if you could look and zero in on it, it would just be a bunch of math. So the problem is we don't know why it's outputting certain things or why the model is changing. The algorithms kind of build themselves. They're increasingly likely to become multimodal, and anyone who says they know what the next 6 months looks like is a total liar, right? This could flame out. The amount of data needed to train these models could dry up. There are attempts to use synthetic data where you have an AI generate training data to train another AI. There's people that argue that that's the future. We don't know. The functionality could drastically drop off. There's a whole bunch of world of possibilities, but really we don't know. They could ramp up significantly. You can create your own Pixar movie through a paragraph in the next year. Who knows? The possibilities are quite wide.
So Michael, Isis asks, not trustworthy for some functions while more trustworthy for others? No?
Potentially, it depends on the model. It depends on what you're trying to do with it. It might be really, for instance, it's known that it's pretty good with time now, which is interesting. So there's some computer scientists that have argued it is internalized, or it has a conception of knowledge of time, such that if you try to trick it up, Susie does A at this time, John does B at this time, it will, and you have a whole bunch of text later, and then you ask it who did what before which person, it will generally get that right very accurately. At the same time, you can give a picture of the clock and say, what time is it on the picture of the clock? And it'll get it wrong pretty consistently. So does it have a conception of time if it can't read a clock? And the models shift over time as well. As the engineers tweak it, there's something called drift, where some computer scientists have argued they found that the model deteriorates over certain questions. In March, it got a basic math problem right 99% of the time, but a couple months ago, it got it right 4% of the time, and the engineers aren't sure why. So at sometimes, for some things, for some models, yes, it appears that it is trustworthy, but there's also been evidence of that shifting over time.
So Michael, I know this is a really big question. that Kathleen has, but if there's anything you want to say right now to this, so if we can't detect the use of AI accurately and students use it, what can we do or say to encourage academic integrity in our courses?
I think you have to have a blunt conversation with students about it. And I think you can learn from students about this too, but you need to, one, there's different ways in which you can construct assignments, in which you focus more on the metacognition. So you say, interact with AI, but I want you to document it. I want you to describe how you interacted with it, why you changed your prompt over time, document the output, and then describe how a student doing it through a library website, say, versus the output you get from an AI. So there's educational tool. I mean, coding has done this. I think there's been code depositories for computer science students. They have managed, you can copy and paste a lot of code and present it as your own. That's pretty easy. There's computer science approaches in which to avoid that type of problem. So I think you need to engage in dialogue with your students, and you need to rethink your assignment structure.
Mm-hmm. Right, and following on that, Vince shared requiring students to provide in their reference list a citation of the Gen AI with the link to the thread that they used. So it's about promoting transparency, and a couple of folks that were agreeing with this importance of transparency.
Transparency is tantamount. I think that is a core concept to consider. Absolutely.
So Andrew shared, I find it's garbage in, garbage out. So inputs are very important.
Yes, I completely agree to that. And how you prompt things makes a big difference. Also, garbage in, garbage out in terms of the data the model was trained on as well. That's important to note as well.
And George had asked, are you able to come to class to discuss this to students?
Yes, I have a very reasonable fee, George. Very reasonable. No, I'd love to. Absolutely. You can email me.
So Lorian asked, is there likely to be any progress made towards solving the issue of how much electricity AI models have to use?
Yeah, it's pretty substantial. If I were to create an image, which I could do pretty easily on like Microsoft Copilot, I learned it'll be about the energy it takes to charge your cell phones from 0 to 100%, which is non-trivial when you have 100 million active users on ChatGPT. I do know there's AI models that are being designed currently to reduce their carbon footprint. So not only electricity, but fresh water. That's a substantial concern, and other environmental impacts. There's a whole new NVIDIA suite of microchips. I want to be precise. Microchips that are designed for AI, which are supposed to increase efficiency. And I think the market condition is driving towards smaller, more efficient AI systems. Currently, it's massive computational resources, but yes, there's a lot of money being thrown and making these more efficient. It means more profit for the companies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then ISIS shared as a follow-up to the question of more or less trustworthy, I think, like thinking more in terms of humanity, so using it as a tool to edit, for instance, not to gather information.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are AIs that are designed specifically for gathering information, like Elicit is one that comes to mind. There's multiple, but there's a lot of educational opportunities to think through new assignments, put a fresh coat of paint, or even to elevate assignments to be more in alignment with higher order thinking skills as a result of AI.
Mm-hmm. So we'll do maybe a couple more questions really quickly, and then we'll get to the demonstration really quickly.
Sure.
Let's see. Manuel asked, I know there are now jobs for AI prompt engineers. Is this something we should learn more about and teach students?
Yeah, so I don't know if we have a responsibility necessarily, but the more sophisticated you are with prompt engineering, the more you're going to get out of AI. And I think the future, I don't think AI is going to replace a ton of jobs. Let me backtrack. People using AI will be more effective than people not using AI. So the more sophisticated you are at using AI for whatever purposes, the better, most likely. Standard caveats about AI in the future in there. Therefore, I would say that you learning up about prompt engineering strategies, now that's a technical term that could actually mean something else. But generally speaking, structured prompts or prompt engineering, or how to make better prompts, basically there's ambiguity around the phrase prompt engineering. It could mean two different things. One, like something very technical, and the other is like making better prompts. So in that second sense of the word, basically, yes, I think you would be almost doing a disservice to yourself if you're only using really unsophisticated inputs and prompts, and saying it's garbage or like it's not trustworthy, it's not useful, etc. When in fact you could get something better out of it if you learned about that or if you developed that as a skill. So yeah, basically, I think that would be a good idea, in particular for you as the instructor, but also to help your students develop sophistication as well. And just like with a lot of other things, sorry, Jen, one more thing.
Oh, no.
Just like with a lot of other aspects of information use and learning, the more intentional and creative students are using information or using AI in order to learn, the more they're gonna learn to use information better and probably learn disciplinary content better.
So we'll do one more question now and then keep them coming, and we'll try to get back to them at the end. But for now, Carrie asked, how do you see LLM companies addressing the issue that they are currently being trained on copyrighted data, article, and proprietary information?
I think they're going to say, I want to make $1 trillion and I want to improve the US economy. Can you let us trample over intellectual property rights? I mean, I have no idea. I mean, OpenAI has admitted forthrightly that they are infringing on copyright. They also, interestingly, have a copyright shield. So they claim that they will pay lawyers' fees or court fees for any intellectual property suit against you if you use the model's output. So it's a unresolved major question. I think it's fair to say generative AI would not exist without weak enforcement of intellectual property rights and weak privacy protections.
So thank you for that, Michael. So I think we wanted to do a quick demo. So Michael, I'm going to stop sharing, and then you should be able to share. Oh, and everyone, the link to this is in the chat if you would like to check it out yourself. It's the huggingface.co.chat. So feel free to try that out if you would like.
Okay, we'll have like 5-ish minutes for this. I do want to stay on time. So there's a lot of different models out there. Oh, I'm going to try to hide. Sorry, have to excuse me for a moment. There we go. Okay, there's a lot of different models out there. People don't know about Hugging Face. It's named after the emoji, but basically it's kind of like a repository for large language models. This is kind of a fun game. How many large language open source will say large language models are on Hugging Face, are on this website? Throw a guess in the chat for how many large open access large language models there are. Open source, excuse me. Most, there's gonna be a lot, Meta, the parent company, Facebook, has developed an open source large language model, but throw in the chat how many you think there are on this website. I'd be curious to hear people's answers. So
we have 6, 15, 12, 8, 2,000, hundreds, thousands, no idea, 20, 50, 1 million.
About 250,000 as of a month ago, a lot of which are just tweaks of existing open source models, but there are a lot. There's also the benefit of using an open source model. They're typically more transparent about how they work versus proprietary models. And so I advocate for this as a way to use open source models, or to consider that. You don't even need you can log in as a guest, or I should say you don't even need a login. You can just click use as guest. And you can use different models really easily and quickly. So I just click on that. I'm using Mixtral or Mistral. This is a new French model that's a lot smaller than the other open access models, but tends to perform about as good as ChatGPT 3.5, which is really impressive. There's other models here, the Llama, which is basically the cream of the crop in terms of open access models. Noose one here is kind of interesting because it uses synthetic data, which is odd. It uses data from ChatGPT 4 in order to train itself. So it's pretty weird. But I'm going to use this newer French model that's getting a lot of press. And we could come up, if in the chat, throw in something, an instructional scenario or something in terms of instruction you're doing in the next 2 weeks. What's a learning activity you're working on? What's a question you're having or a problem? etc. So throw it in the chat and we can interact, and I could throw in a quick prompt here. And while you're doing that, I could show you something a little bit more advanced, a taste of something kind of interesting. I'm using Google Bard, and there's a new thing I'm experimenting with called structured prompting. So rather than just give a single prompt or like a couple sentences or paragraph, you structure things. So there's a thing called the Tracy structured prompt. You give a specific task, you give a role, like you're going to be a research analyst. You give it, this is for the audience, for whatever audience, the specific output, and your goal. And then in this sense, I said, summarize recent information literacy research. And then it gave a specific output in the 500 words. It even word counted for me. I'd have to check on that because it's not actually counting the words. It's just trying to predict what it thinks I want to hear. But this is another way to get at more refined prompts. Okay, Jane, can you help me? Can you give me an idea here?
So one of the recommendations was knowing how to read scholarly articles.
Okay, so I'll show you how I might approach creating this prompt. So I need help with, what was it, reading?
Knowing how to read scholarly articles.
To give me 10 active learning activities that a first or second year university student would find interesting and helpful. Please provide these in tabular format with one column being the idea and another column being the 100-word description. Okay, so we'll see how this works. The point being, like, I'm going to advocate for y'all to just explore. There's a lot of different AIs out there, so I'm using just this one open access model, open source. I keep on saying open access, open source model, but there's Microsoft Copilot, there's Google Bard, there's ChatGPT, and here we have an output. It's actually kind of nice when you ask it to structure things. It tends to do better in that sense. And there's even different articles out there now about best practices for prompting, ranging from use of delimiters to giving it a role. That's really important. It tends to do better when you say, like, it kind of bracket it, like, I want you to do X. So it focuses more on what you want it to do. And then there's also multi-shot prompting where you ask it to refine it. Oh, that was like, okay, that's in the ballpark, but do it again, but do it in this way. So I guess I just wanted to show this hugging chat, hugging face as an example that you can use multiple AIs. And now I could copy and paste this prompt and I can go back to hugging chat and I'm going to try out I'm going to try the Llama 70 billion parameter model. You can also turn off sharing the conversation with the model author so it doesn't get trained on your data. It kind of stays private. So that's kind of nice. You can even give specific for some of the AIs, you can give it kind of like this meta prompt where you say, I want you to act like an expert educator or something like that. And you can give a really long kind of this overarching prompt so that when you interact with it, it'll be kind of, again, that's like another way to give it a specific role. So I can use a different model. I'm going to choose, can I change, please? Okay, well, it's not working right now. So there you go. Let's see if I could refresh. Here we go. So you say, I want to use Llama, right? And you can even give specific instructions. And then you go from there. So I think we're running out of time, Jane. So I'm gonna stop sharing, but I'm a big advocate of you all exploring it and taking some time each week or each month playing around with it, because I think there's evidence that the students are playing around with it and using it much more than instructors. And so it's a question of, do we want to be left behind or not as educators? I don't think we do about this important technology.
Thank you, Michael. So we do have some questions in the chat if you were able to kind of address those as we're going along. And then at the end, if there are additional questions, we can see. Okay. talk about those as well. So just wanted to share these recommendations. Michael, did you have anything you wanted to add here?
I think I've mentioned most of these. The Substacks are a great way to stay up to date on things. I really recommend those pretty strongly.
And just some resources. And again, you'll have access to all of these slides. I'll send the follow-up link with all of the slides and everything so you can access all of these resources as well. So Michael gave us sort of the big picture in terms of AI. And what I wanted to do with this last sort of section of the workshop is kind of relate this to information literacy, right? And think about AI in terms of opportunities in teaching and, concerns about teaching information literacy. So I know most folks will be familiar with this. We have a lot of librarians in the group and other folks that have been to one of my workshops, but I just want to share this, this idea that information literacy is, these set of skills or abilities that are about being able to find information, understanding how information is produced and valued and shared and created, and then being able to use information and creating new knowledge and participating ethically in communities of learning. So, participating, and that's very broad what a community of learning might be. Right. So when we're teaching information literacy, right, we're teaching students to use a range of different search tools and search strategies in the hope of finding information. We're trying to teach them how to evaluate the information that they find for various things, such as the appropriateness or the relevance. We're trying to teach them to ethically incorporate or use information to do something, answer a question, solve a problem, provide a different perspective. And we want students to develop critical understandings about the information environment that we are living in. So how information is created and accessed and distributed and shared and valued. And we also want students to develop understandings of the ways of thinking and doing that more experienced researchers use, right? So that's a lot. So this is just a kind of quick background for everyone of what we're thinking about when we think about, this is sort of what I think about I'm trying to teach when I'm trying to teach information literacy. So with those definitions in mind, that raises for me, as someone who has dedicated my career to information literacy, that raises to me questions, right? So what do we see as the intersections between AI and information literacy? Does AI mean that we need to significantly rethink either our definition of information literacy, how we conceive of what information literacy actually is? Does it mean that we need to significantly rethink how we teach information literacy? And I can't definitively answer that question for everyone, but that's sort of the background question that's sort of guiding this section is, what does AI mean in terms of how we conceive of information literacy and how we teach information literacy? Right. And so I found an article that was really helpful to me, and this was actually from 2021, so even before generative AI really came on the scene. So that thinking about we can think about how we can use AI in ways that allow us to better teach the skills and concepts that we already have been teaching, right? So when we think about this is the kinds of things that I teach when I teach information literacy, what are the ways that I can use AI to better do these things? And then also, if we think about information literacy is about teaching students how to effectively navigate the information environment that we are living in. If AI is a significant part of that information environment, then navigating, understanding how AI works, does that just become part of what it means to be information literate? Right. I think it's fair to say that most of us would say that you can't be information literate without being computer literate. So does that also mean at this stage that you can't be information literate unless you also are AI literate? So that's sort of how I'm approaching the guidance and the recommendations that I'm giving in this next section, is thinking about as someone who still feels very much like a novice with AI, how I would begin to think about how I was incorporating AI into teaching of information literacy. So that's where we're coming from, trying to do this in a way that gets at both of these, that allows us to teach the skills that we've always been teaching or the concepts that we've always been teaching, but is also helping our students to become AI literate as we are doing. So that's sort of where I'm coming from with this background. So I highlight a few examples of things that I wanted to talk about. So how we might use AIs to help students understand key concepts, to do something like develop research questions or search terms, to understand the value of citations, and to think about source evaluation. So we're going to just briefly talk about some of these areas. So there's a lot of key concepts that we want to teach when we teach information literacy. One of these is this idea of scholarship as conversation, right? So we want our students to understand and recognize that all of these scholarly conversations are going on through books and journal articles and websites, and that to really understand a topic, to contribute to a topic, like they have to know what the conversation that's been going on. They, have to be able to navigate that conversation, and then we want them to add their voice to that conversation. Right. So understanding this concept is really key to being able to do a lot of the things that we ask students to do, like, do a literature review, or to do an annotated bibliography, or to know why citations are so valuable. Right. So how might we use AI to help students understand this concept? So I asked ChatGPT 3.5, that's the free version, to provide me with a definition of scholarship as conversation. And this is the definition that it provided. It's a concept within the framework for information literacy that emphasizes a dynamic and ongoing nature of the scholarly discourse. By the way, it doesn't cite the framework for information literacy, it just mentions it. Recognizing that scholarly work is part of this ongoing dialogue. So I thought this was a pretty decent definition of scholarship as conversation. It also gave me some key components of scholarship as conversation: the dialogue, logical nature, citations and references, building on previous works. All of those I thought were really relevant to understanding what scholarship as conversation is. So one of the things we could get our students in there and having them use these tools to think about, okay, what does it mean when we talk about this? Maybe if you look at this definition, you might think it may be too challenging for a first-year student to understand. So this is where we get to the point where Michael was mentioning, if you be more specific and give it more guidance on what you're looking for. So I changed to tell me, give me a definition that could be understood by a first-year college student, right? And so it made this definition, and it's a little bit easier to grasp. It's part of being this big discussion in your courses, and this is what it looks like in the academic world. And I thought it was a really a decent description that seemed understandable. At a level that a first-year student might be able to understand. I also asked it, for one at I think it was like a high school freshman level, and it gave a different definition. Right. And then I used Copilot. I asked Copilot, what's the purpose of a literature review? So Copilot is Microsoft's AI tool that's available at Ohio State. And it gave me this definition of what a literature review is, but it also gave me some additional prompts. So additional questions that you could ask related to this. What is the difference between a literature review and an annotated bibliography? How do I choose which sources to include in my literature review? Can you give me an example of a literature review? So it gave me additional questions that I could consider as I was thinking about this topic. So this is one thing that I think that we could do as we're thinking about teaching these key information literacy concepts and skills, is getting our students in there and having them ask these questions, and having them, revise the question and ask the question again. Students could compare results across multiple search tools. This is what one AI tool says a literature review is. This is what another AI tool is. This is what a third tool is. What do they have in common? What are the differences between them? Right? They could evaluate the accuracy of the results. They could go out and find citations to support what is said. So if the AI tool doesn't provide any citations, the job for the student could be able to go out and find sources that support what this tool says. Right? Locate additional sources. And these are just different examples of questions that they could ask, and they could play around with asking the questions in different ways at different levels and see what the responses are. And I think it's good for us just to also know that students might be asking these questions as a just-in-time resource, right? We know if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they need to know what a literature review is, if they ask an AI tool, this is the kind of response that they might get. And it might be, there might be some problems with it, but generally the ones that I found were okay. But we need to know that students might be doing that and know what kinds of responses that they might get. So, just kind of getting in there, seeing what kind of responses you get, practicing with it, letting students practice, comparing the responses, critically evaluating the responses that are given. That could be one way that you could approach using an AI tool. Research questions and search terms is another way that you might be able to use AI. And this, I wanted to highlight this resource article by James and Filgo, Where Does ChatGPT Fit into the Framework for Information Literacy? This is an idea that comes directly from this article here. where they talk about using ChatGPT to help students develop research questions. I know as a librarian, I think that developing research questions is one of the hardest things that we ask students to do. Because it really requires a lot of background knowledge, and you have to understand what a good question looks like, and it can be really challenging. So one thing that students could use AI to do would be to, develop multiple sample research questions related to a topic. They can, ask, give me a few sample research questions on this topic. They could review those questions. Which ones seem valid? Which ones seem problematic? Why do they seem problematic? What are the strengths and weaknesses of those questions? What are examples of poorly constructed research questions? And then they could use it to identify relevant search terms, narrow research question. So this is an example. I gave ChatGPT a prompt. I have to write a 10-page paper related to the American Civil War. What are examples of research questions? And it gave me these as some examples. So how did economic factors such as the institution of slavery and regional economic disparities contribute to the outbreak of the American Civil War? So, you could start with that and talk to students. Okay, how does this work as a research question? What do you all think about the effectiveness of this as a research question in this context? Do you think it would work? What might be problematic about that? And so that could, lead to a good discussion of the characteristics of appropriate research questions. Right. And then I ask it, okay, give me some examples of, this is my research question. What are some examples of search terms that I could use? And these were just a subset of it. Actually gave me quite a few more search terms that I could use. And you could talk about, okay, how do these search terms connect to that research question? Do you think that those are the appropriate search terms? Now that you've seen these, are there other search terms that you could think of and use? How would you combine these in ways that are effective? And it actually did give advice. Like, here's how you might combine these search terms to use them. And then I asked, okay, can you narrow this question down a little bit? And so it gave some advice. Here's some of the ways that you could narrow down questions. You could focus on a specific geographic region. You could focus on specific, foreign powers. So it gives you that sort of guidance, and you can talk to students about thinking about, how do we narrow down a research question and make it more appropriate? Here's some examples, here's some guidance. What do we think about this guidance? I also asked, give me an example of a poorly constructed research question. And it gave, was the Civil War good or bad? Or why did the Civil War happen? And explains why those are poor research questions. So you could talk about those. I know I've gotten, many times in the past working with students, examples of good or bad kind of research questions. And we could talk about why it's problematic to use, is something good or bad as a research question. So that's some examples of how we could use AI in terms of research questions. Citation. I just wanted to mention briefly, so I tried ChatGPT 3.5 and it would not give me specific citations. Right? I asked it for 10 specific citations. It says I can't provide specific articles. Other AI tools, though, will provide specific articles. So it just kind of really depends on what tool that you are using. I asked the Hugging chat site to give me citations, and it gave me really poor citations, the example that I used. This is a completely wrong citation with the wrong link. It's the wrong year. It doesn't actually talk about AI here. And so you could have students try these different tools and think about whether they provide citations or not, why it might not provide citations, the ones that do, how do we evaluate the accuracy of those citations? How would we go about checking whether this is a good citation or not? So lots of questions I think that you could use in terms of letting students play around with these tools, practice, and then, they're getting that practice, they're getting an understanding of what some of the limitations of the tools are. And they're also just getting a big picture understanding of the role of citations. If ChatGPT gives me an answer that has no citations at all, what is the value of that to me as a student, right? Is that really a valuable answer if it doesn't have any citations included, or if the citations are inaccurate? Right? And then lastly, thinking about source evaluation. So lateral reading, this idea of having students go out and look across multiple sites to find information about a website or a topic or a claim. So one of the things is you could have an AI tool generate a list of statements related to some sort of relevant or controversial issue and have students investigate themselves the relevance or the accuracy of those claims. Right. One thing that was interesting again with ChatGPT 3.5, like I asked it to give me false statements about climate change, and it would not. It said I can't give answers that are false. But other AI tools, as Michael, it's going to depend greatly depending on what tool they are using, whether or not it's going to give them false answers or not. But I did ask for some examples of false statements about drinking milk, and students could go out and investigate these claims as a way to practice their lateral reading skills. So those are just a few examples that I wanted to share. And Michael already demonstrated this, but using AI to develop sample lesson plans or activities. I've tried it with a couple of different things. None of them have been like groundbreaking in terms of, I'd never thought of doing this in a class before, but, it could definitely be helpful when one of those, you have a class coming in, you're not really sure what you want to do, and you need a lesson plan really quickly. This could give, some ideas to think about. And then I just wanted to share some resources, some sample lesson plans, so you'll be able to access all of these. Some resources that I thought were helpful, including some that were just published in the last month that I thought were really interesting and useful that could be helpful as well. All right, we have a few minutes left. Let's see where we are in terms of questions or comments.
There's been a lot of just discussion in the chat chain. I've been trying to answer some questions as well. But I think we're open. If you want to raise your hand, you can talk if you have a specific question or comment. That'd be great.
Go ahead, Andrew.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. I do image generation with Stable Diffusion, which is also on Hugging Face. And I would recommend anybody who's got a decent computer try doing this stuff locally on a computer. It's kind of a different experience. But there's a method for training image generation that it's called embedding or textual inversion, and you can customize results without touching the model. Are you aware of anything like that in the chat domain? An equivalent to that sort of methodology?
I could speak up and say I'm not familiar. I mean, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, or two, it's not being worked on. Sorry, go ahead, please. Please.
Yeah, I've never seen mention of it. I don't hear a mention of it anywhere, but I don't know if you've seen the textual inversion stuff with image making, but it's extremely powerful. And the file size is very, very small. And I was able to do it with almost kind of no background in this and have it produce false Brutuses or false self-portraits, or my self-portrait as Abraham Lincoln, or my self-portrait as way beyond the sort of TikTok filter stuff.
Yeah, my understanding is that's a fundamentally different type of approach that wouldn't, my understanding is there's a reason that's used for images and not for text.
Ah, okay, cool.
But that being said, there are new models coming out. So remember, one of my first slides was the circles within circles. Those barriers are being broken down. So for instance, RAG, retrieval augmented generation, where you kind of connect a generative AI to a database or to a series of a trove of documents. So there's multiple ways in which it's modifying or evolving. The models are evolving. So who knows where that's going to go next? Maybe it's not efficient now, but eventually will be. I don't know.
Thank you. That helps.
Go ahead, Vince.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for putting this session on. It's been really informative. I've created a custom GPT for one of my courses this semester using OpenAI's feature. I call it Supply Chain Brutus, and it's all about. I happen to have all the content for my course as a working textbook, and so I was able to upload that info and craft some instructions on how this GPT should behave and act as a virtual tutor. The drawback to this is my student interactions end up going into training OpenAI's data. Students have to pay for a subscription in order to access it. They have to have the premium subscription. And, I don't have a whole lot of control. And it's something, for teaching purposes, it's not really, I don't see this as a long-term solution. This was more just experimenting for the short term. What other, I've also thought about using the assistance API that OpenAI has. But I would love to try to go down the path of maybe leveraging some of these open source large language models to create my own custom AI teaching assistant or AI tutor. What would be what are some of the options or some of the resources that might be out there to try and accomplish that?
Well, one, Jane, do you mind if I start?
Yeah.
One might be to have the AI locally. So I just learned about Jan.ai, and there's others that do this too, to where it makes it easier for you to download a model locally. So rather than have to be online, that way in principle, you can even even online, but in principle, you can mess with the weights. I don't know if Jan.ai does that or not. And in principle, you can fine tune it yourself as well, which would be really advanced, really cool. There is some computer science stuff out there right now, I think, about personalized learning for something like this. I think you're kind of at the forefront in terms of what you can do that's publicly available with ChatGPT 4. You could get the API, and then it costs like $0.01 a pop for every interaction. And I don't know if you want students paying that or you pay that, or if OSU could, et cetera, et cetera. Michigan has like a local instance of I think Copilot, I'm not sure, but that's local, and they're paying up the wazoo. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month for a week for it. Arizona State just announced a partnership with ChatGPT. I don't know how much money that is. I don't know how much customization options there are. Yeah, for my money, it would be download it locally, potentially host it on your own server so that your own students can interact with it. And then it would be cool if you could use some type of back propagation to where you can retrain it, right? So the students can give thumbs up, thumbs down. And also there's probably educational ed tech companies out there that are trying to work on this problem yourself. But yeah, I would say downloading it locally kind of saves some of the hassle. But yeah, I think you're kind of on the cutting edge, Vince.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Vince, I also really loved your idea about having students teach the AI themselves, like teach it how to, was that you that put that comment in there?
Yeah, and I wish I could say that was an original idea, but the Wharton has a list of teaching ideas and roles that you can have the Gen AI play. You can have it act as a mentor, a teammate, and that was kind of the inspiration for building one of these custom GPTs.
So I know we're getting close to the end of time. Michael, I don't know if you're able to stay a few more minutes if folks have a different question. Okay, I'm happy to stay as well. But if for those folks that do have to leave, we will send the recording as well as the copy of the chat transcript to everyone sometime later on today. But we can continue and stay on for a few more minutes for folks that are interested. Pasha did have a question, Michael, of whether or not you're aware of any the status of copyright and intellectual property in Europe, where they have stricter online laws, whether there might be differences there.
Yeah, I mean, they did pass an AI law, but I don't think it's like formally adopted or finalized. I think there's some wrinkles being ironed out, but my understanding is it's going to be more it's going to be more restrictive. It will take into account generative AI, but generally speaking, it was predominantly drafted before the generative AI kind of boom past year, 2023. My understanding is it's most likely going to be driving towards open source models and supporting that and putting more restrictions on various large language models and various AI systems. What that exactly looks like, I'm not sure, but just like with privacy, online privacy, they're probably going to be kind of in the forefront or well ahead of Western other like the United States, for instance.
And let's see, Henry had shared in the chat for OSU folks, AS Arts and Sciences, there's a guidance for addressing AI in syllabi. There's a link there that folks are interested in checking that out. Other questions? Andrew, did you have another question?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
All right, so any other questions that folks would like us to address? So thank you all as folks are leaving. It was great to have you all here today. And again, be on the lookout for the recording, slides, everything will be coming to you a little bit later on today. And please feel free to share with other colleagues that might be interested.